Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the sources you send our way and, well, we really try to pull out the insights that count.
Mm-hmm.
And this time, you, our learner, you've handed us Atul Gawande's Being Mortal, Medicine and What Matters in the End. It's a really powerful book.
It absolutely is.
So think of this as your guided tour through the core ideas, the key arguments Gawande makes about aging, dying, and how medicine fits into all that, or sometimes doesn't.
Exactly. We're going to be looking closely at how Gawande sees the medical system. Its focus often being on cure, maybe sometimes losing sight of actual care when people are aging or facing the end of life.
Right.
Our mission here is to really boil down the main points, those memorable stories he tells, and importantly, why this book matters so much today. Oh, and this deep dive is brought to you by Ben's Book Summaries.
Great. So where does Gawande kick things off? What's the starting point for his whole exploration?
Well, it actually starts very personally with his own medical training.
Oh,
He looks back and he realizes something pretty striking. He learned tons about diseases, treatments, how to fix things.
the mechanics of it all.
Precisely. But almost nothing about the natural process of getting old, about frailty, or even how to talk to people about dying, how to help them navigate that end part of life with some, dignity.
That's a huge gap, isn't it? It points to a real imbalance in how doctors are trained, all focused on the intervention, the saving lives part.
Which is critical, obviously.
Of course. But maybe not enough on comfort, on well-being, especially when a cure just isn't on the cards. He said his textbooks barely mentioned aging.
Barely a footnote, seems like. And he uses a specific case early on, Lazaroff, to really drive this home.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. The patient with the terminal condition, the spinal tumor.
Right, and he chose to have surgery, even though it wouldn't fix the paralysis, it wouldn't really change the underlying prognosis.
And that, for Gawande, showed that the system's default, didn't it? The tendency is always do something, intervene.
Exactly. Even if the something doesn't really offer a better quality of life, or maybe even carries big risks, the option was there, and hope is a powerful thing, so the patient went for it. But it raises questions.
And this focus on intervention has had a wider effect, hasn't it, on just how we experience death in general. He talks about where people die.
Oh, that's a really stark statistic he brings up. Think about it. 1945, most people died at home.
Right, surrounded by family, probably.
Mm-hmm. Then fast forward to the 1980s, and suddenly it's mostly hospitals, nursing homes, institutions.
That shift tells you so much. It's like death became this medical event taken out of the home, out of the community.
Outsourced almost. And Gawande is pretty blunt that the medical profession, well, it struggles when faced with problems it can't fix. The unfixable ones.
Yeah, the uncurable stuff. And that can lead to problems, right? Like maybe less compassion.
It's a risk, he points out. If the whole system is geared towards cure, and cure isn't possible, there can be this feeling of failure almost. And that might sometimes lead to a kind of callousness or just focusing on the technical bits, maybe prolonging suffering inadvertently.
So in our last days, he argues, our fate is often decided by medical protocols, the latest technology, and importantly, strangers in these institutional settings.
Yeah, and that can feel really disconnected from who we are, what actually matters to us. Now, tied into this is how old age itself has changed and how society is or isn't keeping up.
Right, because the way we care for older people isn't the same everywhere, or even how it used to be here.
Exactly. He draws this really powerful contrast. He talks about his grandfather back in India.
Well, yes, the traditional setup.
Yeah, living in a big family home, still very much part of things, respected, his opinion valued, even as he got physically frail.
Compared to, who's the American example? Alice.
Alice Hobson. Living in the U.S., technically had family nearby, but essentially lived a very solitary life as she became more frail. It's a stark difference.
It really highlights that breakdown of the multi-generational family structure that used to be the norm for supporting elders.
Absolutely. That system has largely faded in many Western countries, and the irony is we're living much longer now.
Right, lifespans have shot up.
But our social structures, our expectations, they haven't really caught up. We still have these outdated ideas about retirement age, for example, even though the demographics have totally shifted. Way more older adults.
And he mentions that statistic, too, about older people living alone more often now. Fewer spouses, fewer kids nearby.
It's a huge number, and yet, have we really thought through, as a society, how people are supposed to manage those later years, potentially alone? It feels like a blind spot.
Definitely. And it's not just the social side, it's the physical reality, too. Gawande goes into the biology of aging.
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from the the less pleasant parts, losing teeth, bones getting softer, arteries hardening, joints stiffening. It's the natural course of things.
It's just what happens over time.
It is. And with that comes increased risks. Falls are a big one, high blood pressure, heart function decreasing. He makes this interesting point, too, that historically, dying just from old age was actually quite rare.
Really? How so?
Well, people usually died younger from infections, accidents, childbirth. Living into advanced old age, like we do now, is kind of unnatural in a historical sense. We've engineered longer lives.
That's a wild thought. So we're living longer than maybe our bodies were strictly designed for. But he also talks about resilience, right?
Oh, yeah, the body's amazing. It has backup systems, redundancies. It can compensate for a lot of accumulated damage over the years. That's why we can live so long, despite the wear and tear.
But even with that resilience, eventually things decline and that loss of independence. Gawande says that's the real fear for many older people, not death itself.
That's such a crucial insight. He quotes someone saying, "Old age is a continuous series of losses," and Philip Roth called it a massacre. It's not just about not existing anymore. It's the fear of losing everything that makes up your life, your hearing, your memory, your friends, your home, your ability to just manage.
And Alice Hobson's story, again, it just paints such a clear picture of that struggle. The falls, worrying about money scams, not being able to do simple things like cooking or cleaning.
Exactly. And that's where those terms come in, the ADLs and IADL.
Activities of daily living.
Right, and independent activities of daily living. Things like bathing, dressing, eating, those are ADLs. Then IADLs are more like managing finances, shopping, transportation. They're ways to measure just how much independence someone has lost. Even small losses can have a huge impact.
And again, that contrast with his grandfather. Despite physical limits, he had status, respect. Ellis felt increasingly isolated. It shows a real shift in societal value, doesn't it?
It really does. And that leads him right into the discussion about nursing homes, which have become the sort of default answer when people can't manage alone anymore. He looks at their history, starting with poorhouses.
Which sound absolutely dreadful, like something out of Dickens. Not just for the old, but anyone dependent and poor. Grim.
Truly grim. And nursing homes were supposed to be better, obviously. But Gawande asks, okay, are they really focused on quality of life? Or is it mainly about safety, medical targets, ticking boxes?
Keeping people safe is important, of course, but
But is it the only thing? He argues the focus often shifts heavily onto preventing bed sores, making sure residents eat enough, preventing falls, all crucial medical goals. But sometimes that happens at the expense of what makes life feel worth living for that person.
yeah, he talks about the rigid routines, losing your personal stuff, having no control over your day. That quote sticks with me. This feels like a hospital, not a home.
It says it all, doesn't it? And those little stories he tells, the daily battles over food choices, or when someone can take a bath, or just wanting to go outside. They seem small, but they represent this huge loss of autonomy.
And Alice's story ends quite sadly in the nursing home, doesn't it? Just sort of quiet endurance, then decline.
Yeah, a kind of passive acceptance after a while. It's heartbreaking. But thankfully, Gawande doesn't just leave it there. He looks at alternatives.
Like family caregiving, which is what most people probably do or rely on first.
It's the main alternative, yes. But he uses Shelley's story, caring for her father, Lou, to show just how incredibly demanding that can be. Emotionally, physically, financially, especially if you're also working, raising kids.
The sandwich generation struggle, it's immense.
Totally. So then there's assisted living. That came about as a kind of middle option, right? Aiming for more freedom than a nursing home.
But does it always deliver?
Often falls short, Gawande suggests. Sometimes it's the cost. Sometimes regulations still limit real autonomy. It's not always the solution it promises to be.
And this ties into that theory he mentions. Socio-something.
Socio-emotional selectivity theory. It's this idea that as people get older or maybe face any kind of perceived endpoint to their life, their priorities naturally shift.
How so?
Well, instead of focusing on new goals, meeting new people, learning new things, they tend to focus more on deepening existing relationships, savoring the moment, finding emotional meaning in the present.
Oh, okay. Focusing on what and who really matters most.
Exactly, which has huge implications for how we should be designing care, right? It suggests connection and present enjoyment are key.
Which leads perfectly into those more hopeful examples he found, like Bill Thomas's experiment.
Oh, the Eden alternative at Chase Memorial. That story is amazing. This nursing home was, pretty typical, depressing. And Thomas, this young doctor, had this radical idea of bring in life.
Life, like literally.
Literally, hundreds of plants, birds, dogs, cats, and children from a daycare center. It sounds chaotic, maybe. But the effect was transformative. Residents who were withdrawn came alive, medication rates dropped, loneliness plummeted, even death rates fell. It showed this profound need we have for, as Thomas put it, a cause beyond ourselves. Something to care for, connection.
Wow. That idea of needing a purpose, even at the very end.
Mm-hmm. It connects to this idea of loyalty, being dedicated to something bigger than just your own survival. That's where meaning comes from.
And there were other places too, right? Like Newbridge.
Newbridge on the Charles and Peter Sanborn Place. These are examples trying to do things differently. Smaller living units, like households, trying to feel more like home. More resident control, intergenerational programs connecting them with the community.
And that woman at Sanborn Place, Jackie Carson, she sounded pretty determined.
Fiercely determined. Her goal was to let people live their lives in their own way, even with significant disabilities, even if that meant letting them make what others might see as poor choices, like choosing what to eat or when to get up, real autonomy.
That takes courage, institutionally speaking. And there was another model, the Florence Center.
Yeah, their approach was empowering the frontline staff, the aides who spend the most time with residents, to make decisions based on individual needs and preferences, rather than rigid top-down rules.
So these examples show it is possible to create environments that are more about living, not just existing safely.
Definitely. It's possible, but it requires a real shift in mindset away from the purely medical model.
Which brings us back to a really tough but central part of the book, actually talking about dying, having those hard conversations.
Yeah, because most deaths now aren't sudden. They follow these long battles with chronic, incurable conditions.
Right. Cancer, heart failure, dementia, things that decline over time.
Exactly. And that makes it incredibly difficult to know when to shift gears. When you stop fighting for a cure that's not coming and start focusing on comfort and quality of remaining life.
That's where hospice comes in, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Hospice is specifically about comfort care for people with a terminal illness, usually defined as 6 months or less to live. But crucially, it requires accepting that the illness is terminal and agreeing to forego treatments aimed at curing it.
That acceptance is the hard part.
Yeah.
But he points out something surprising about hospice, doesn't he? About survival.
Yeah, it was fascinating. You'd think stopping curative treatment would mean dying sooner. But studies have shown that's often not the case. Sometimes people in hospice live just as long or even a bit longer than similar patients getting aggressive care.
How could that be?
Well, maybe avoiding the harsh side effects of some treatments, better symptom management, less stress. The focus on holistic well-being, physical, emotional, spiritual, seems to have a powerful effect.
That's really counterintuitive. He also mentioned that town, La Crosse.
La Crosse, Wisconsin. Yeah, they had this amazing community-wide effort to get people talking about end-of-life wishes and filling out advance directives.
Like living wills.
Exactly, and it worked. A huge percentage of people there had documented their preferences, which made decisions much easier for families and doctors later on. It shows it can be done on a larger scale.
Often, Gawande says, the conversations doctors do have aren't the right ones. They focus too much on just listing treatment options.
Right, like we can do chemo A or surgery B or radiation C, which do you want? Without first asking, what's actually most important to you right now? What are you hoping for? What are you afraid of?
Understanding the person's priorities before jumping to the medical menu.
Precisely. He really pushes for this idea of shared decision-making. The doctor's role isn't just to list options, but to help the patient understand the information in the context of their own life, their own values, and then make a choice together.
And his own family's experience really brings this home, doesn't it, with his father?
Oh, absolutely. That's a deeply moving part of the book. His father, also a surgeon, gets this complex spinal tumor, faces paralysis, and they navigate this whole maze of treatments, hopes, setbacks. A series of falls becomes a turning point.
Right, the falls made the risks of more treatment seem too high.
Mm-hmm. And ultimately, after really difficult conversations, his father decides against more aggressive surgery and prioritizes comfort, quality time, being at home. It's a powerful personal example of making choices aligned with values, not just medical possibilities.
He also mentions the Athens village model quickly.
Yeah, that's another interesting community-based approach. It's like a network where older people living in their own homes support each other, share resources, helping each other age in place rather than moving to an institution. Another way to maintain control and connection.
So Gawande's father eventually accepts his decline, chooses hospice.
Yes, gradually. It wasn't easy, but he prioritized being comfortable, being with family, having those meaningful connections in his final months.
And that ties into another really interesting psychological bit Gawande brings in from Daniel Kahneman, the peak end rule.
Ah, yeah, the experiencing self versus the remembering self. It's fascinating.
So the idea is that our memory of an experience, especially a painful one, isn't based on the average pain or how long it lasted.
Nope, it's dominated by two things. The moment of peak intensity, good or bad, and how it felt right at the very end.
The peak and the end, hence the name.
Exactly. So if you have a long, unpleasant medical procedure, but the last few minutes are relatively calm and painless, your memory of it might be better than if it ended abruptly during a painful moment, even if the total suffering was the same.
That has huge implications for end-of-life care, doesn't it?
Absolutely huge. It suggests we need to focus not only on minimizing moment-to-moment suffering, though that's vital, but also on trying to craft, well, better endings, moments of peace, connection, meaning right near the conclusion.
Like Jewel Douglas, who just wanted quality of life, no more risky chances.
Right, or Peg Batchelder, remember her? The pianist.
Yeah, she was able to teach piano again, even while in hospice.
Exactly. Hospice helped manage her symptoms so she could do what mattered most to her in her final weeks. That's focusing on the quality, the meaning, creating positive final experiences.
So wrapping it all up, Gawande really emphasizes the significance of how things end. As death gets closer, often other people have to make decisions.
The responsibility shifts. And that's why having had those conversations beforehand, knowing the person's wishes and values is just so incredibly critical.
He talks about his own family's struggle with those final decisions for his father, letting go of the urge for just one more intervention.
Yeah, honoring his father's wish for a peaceful death at home, even when it felt difficult. It underscores that endings matter profoundly, not just for the person dying, but for the loved ones left behind too. How we remember that time is shaped by those final experiences.
There are just so many moments in the book that stick with you. That opening line, I learned about a lot of things in medical school, but mortality wasn't one of them.
Sets the stage perfectly, doesn't it?
It really does. And that constant comparison, his grandfather in India, Alice Hobson in America, it's like a recurring theme showing different ways societies handle aging.
And those hopeful stories. Bill Thomas's Eden experiment, seeing residents wake up, basically, when life was brought in.
Yeah. Plants, animals, kids, connection.
Then the flip side, those little sad stories from typical nursing homes showing the loss of control, and the contrast with places like Newbridge or Sanborn Place, showing it can be different.
And weaving through it all is his own story with his father. That makes it so much more personal and relatable.
Absolutely. And throwing in things like the peak end rule gives you these, like, aha moments about psychology, too. Oh, and Peg Batchelder teaching piano again via hospice.
Such a great vignette. And the very end, him scattering his father's ashes in the Ganges. Even as a scientist,
Yeah.
that need for ritual.
It speaks volumes. So for you, our learner, listening to all this, being mortal is really an invitation to think, isn't it? To reflect on how you see aging, illness, the end of life.
Yeah, because it's universal. We all face it, for ourselves, for people we love. And thinking about what really matters before a crisis hits is so important.
It pushes us to think beyond just more time, more medical procedures, to ask what makes life meaningful, what gives it quality, and how can we ensure that quality, that autonomy, that search for meaning continues right to the very end.
And hopefully understanding these ideas helps you feel more prepared, maybe more empowered, to have those crucial conversations with your family, with doctors. The big takeaway, the aha moment, is maybe realizing that our current medical system has limits,
Real limits when it comes to aging and dying well.
but that there are other ways, more human ways, focused on the person, not just the disease.
Exactly. The heart of it is that being mortal is just part of being human. And facing that reality means shifting our focus. Not just trying to extend life, but making sure the life we have right up to the end is truly a life worth living.
So let's leave you with this thought to chew on. What does living well actually mean to you? Especially when you think about getting older, about the limits we all face eventually.
It's a big question, a personal one.
Maybe thinking about it leads you to look into things like advanced care planning, or just learning more about different models of care out there. Definitely something to ponder. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Atul Gawande's Being Mortal.
Yes, thank you.
This deep dive has been brought to you by Ben's Book Summaries.